Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Great Black Speakers Podcast, where we connect through conversation. I'm your host, Lawrence Watkins. I am the founder and CEO of Great Black Speakers Bureau. I'm also the president and chief operating officer of the Black Business School. So today we have a very special guest, my good friend down here in Medellin, Colombia, Mr. Ace Chapman, and we're talking all about how to flip businesses like houses. And Ace is a fund manager or the fund manager at Partners Equity Fund and business acquisition specialist at acechapman.com. So Ace, man, can you tell the audience a little bit about what you do and how you've gotten to this point in your career?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the things when I tell people that I buy and sell businesses, the first reaction is, what are you talking about? Like, you buy businesses that are already existing and it's profitable. And the cool thing is, I remember 20 years ago when I bought my very first business, when I mentioned it, nobody really was talking about buying and selling businesses at that point. It's becoming more of a subject now. But when I think back to that very first deal, it was life-changing for me. I was going to school. It was excited to have a scholarship to Colgate University, one of the top 20 universities in the country, was president of my class, like really engaged, but I always had that entrepreneurial bug. I was that kid in elementary school who was like bringing candy, trying to sell it to everybody in class and all of that. But while I was in school, this whole internet thing was blowing up. This is like 98, 97. And I joined this website called Cool Wall Street in 97. And it was a stock market simulator. And so fast forward 2 years, I'm a sophomore in college. And this site is always crashing. The customer service is terrible. I'm coming up on my summer of my sophomore year. I reach out to them basically to become an intern. And his response changed my life. He basically responded and said, hey, I want to sell this business. That's why things aren't as good as they had been. I've moved on to another venture. And I was a broke college kid, so it wasn't like that was the end all be all, but I was really curious. Like, I just wanted to know how much money they were making. I was just curious to get behind the scenes. And he told me, hey, if you know anybody who wants to buy it, let me know. And I'm like, oh, maybe I'll find somebody who wants to buy it. Tell me what you want for it. What's the income? You sent me all the information. And I really didn't know anything about evaluating a business, but I knew I was making $60,000 a year. Is what he showed me. He only wanted $70,000 for it. And I'm like, man, my only comparable at that point was college. And my college, if I didn't have a scholarship, there were other kids that were paying $40,000 a year. That's $160,000 over the course of those 4 years. And I had friends that were graduating after that investment and making $30,000, $40,000. So I'm like, okay, $160,000 for $40,000 or $70,000 for $60,000. That was really my justification for like being interested in the deal. But even then, it didn't matter because I only had $3,000. So I, saved up $3,000 from the summer before, and it's like, this seems like a really great deal, but I know I'm $67,000 short, which for a college kid, like might as well be $1 million. But it kept bugging me. So a couple of weeks passed, and I can't get it off of my mind. I'm thinking, man, how could I make this happen? I go back to them, and they were willing to finance half of it. So that got me 35. And then I talked to a buddy of mine who came from money, and he had 15 grand. He liked the business, and I told him he could be involved and build his resume. And so it's funny, this is one of the cool things in this is you got to understand where people's motivations are. And, for the seller, for instance, he was willing to sell or finance that because he knew, hey, this young kid was willing to come work here for free. He obviously has a passion for this business. And if I don't do something quick, the business is going to die. So I was able to leverage that. With my buddy, he came from money and needed something a little bit different on his resume. And so he was most excited about, hey, let's buy this. I'm going to add that to my resume as something I've done, because for him and his background, like doing another internship isn't going to set him apart from everybody else. And so, he's already paying $160,000. He was one of the kids that was paying full tuition. So he's paying $160,000. What's another 15 to add some real juice to his resume? So that was his motivation, but I was still, quite a bit short, about 17,000 short. And what I did is something that I do not recommend anybody do that's watching this. And I ended up taking out some credit cards. If you've gone to college, they have all of these tables that try to get you to sign up for these credit card deals. So looking back now, I would not recommend that, but that deal did end up working out, and that was kind of my introduction to just a shift, because everything before then was, if I want to make income, I've got to go to college, get some credentials, and get a good job. Or I've got to take the risk, start a business, and spend the next year trying to build it from scratch while it's not making money, and pour more money into it, do everything, building the business model out, figure out the services, market, match, all of those things. And so here was this third alternative that I was like, man, nobody's ever told me that the same way you can go out and buy a car, you can go out and buy a house, you can go out and buy income. And that shifted my life, and has changed these last 20 years that I've spent buying and selling businesses.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, man. And how did that business turn out after you purchased it?
So this is a story that I love to tell. It went from my greatest risk at that point, when I first started the business or first bought it. A lot of people ask me, like, man, weren't you afraid that this thing was going to fail? And it's funny, because I was so focused on the fact that if those credit card statements went to my parents' house instead of to my dorm address, that my parents would fly to New York and come to Colgate and kill me. That was my biggest concern at that point. So I didn't even have enough room to be nervous about the business. So the business was great. We end up going in, growing the business over the course of about 3 years, made an amazing return. But then 2001 hit, and people who are familiar with what happened back in 2001 was the dot-com bust. And our customers were victims of the bust. And so we weren't getting that income from them. It was basically ad revenue that we were making. And so I was devastated. And, I'm like, because I left school, I'm focused on this. It got too big for me to run from college. I gave up my degree, gave up this $160,000 scholarship. I'm like, man, this is the end. Like, I don't have a degree. The business is gone. And it took my mentor to kind of pull me back and say, dude, look at this deal. And like, what was your income? What was your investment in? What was your income from it? And when I looked at the whole thing over the course of those 3 years, that which was really $3,000 that I put into this thing, had turned into $280,000 that I made over those 3 years. Like, this is not a failure. And this is the problem that I think ends up happening to a lot of entrepreneurs, is when you can buy something that is making money right now, day one, you start decreasing your risk. And so it's literally the opposite of being an entrepreneur, where day one, when you start, you're literally increasing your risk, even if it's just your time, because there's a huge opportunity cost to where you put your time. And as somebody who considers my time of my infinitely most valuable asset to compare to any other asset, especially money, that's something that, and when you're not getting paid for it, you're making that investment. And so every day that investment gets more and more. And with the business, when you go and you acquire that, every day that income comes in, you're decreasing your risk in that deal.